Hello, everybody. Welcome to the EC's last charging infrastructure webinar of the year. We have really loved putting these together and are so glad that you've joined us this afternoon. My name is Rebecca Saraboff, and I'm a senior Eevee infrastructure associate over here at the EC. And I am actually usually behind the scenes helping with the production of these webinars, but I thought that this month I would give the other side a try. Like many of you, I've spent the last 6 months learning about and engaging in strategies behind efficient, effective, and equitable public charging deployment. And I am really happy to be joined today by 4 of the folks who have helped me do just that. We are really lucky to spend the next hour learning from Sam Houston, Matthew Getz, Blair St. Ledger Olaf, and Richard Ezeki, who, in addition to being 4 of the smartest people I know, are also 4 of our community's brightest and biggest thinkers who have been behind many of transportation electrification's biggest wins of the year. So before we turn to our speakers, and in the spirit of a year in review, I wanted to take a moment to share 2 of our greatest highlights from this year, which you'll see in a second. Awesome. I'm going to go back a slide. So first, one of our greatest highlights at the EC from this year is this webinar series. Since June, we have hosted 6 webinars, 26 speakers, and over 1,500 attendees. We have really enjoyed learning with all of you and are really grateful for your support and your participation and leadership in this webinar series. We are taking a break next month, but we'll be back in February with new and exciting content. And we want to build 2023's webinar series around your interests and around your questions. So please let us know what you'd like to see in the new year, and we're happy to build some awesome content together. Next, I am super excited to share our newest report with you, the Local Government Playbook, which you might have seen over social media or in your inbox, is packed with recommendations for how counties, cities, and towns can leverage federal investments in EV infrastructure. The report has actions and strategies that local governments can enact both now and in the future, including best practices, innovative policy approaches, and lessons learned from previous charging deployments. You can find the report on our website and soon in this chat, and I hope that you will give it a read and let us know what we can do to support you in enacting any of the things inside of it. As we kick off our webinar today, I want to remind everybody that we'll have a Q&A section at the bottom of the hour with all of our speakers. So as you think of questions, please leave them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Each of our speakers is going to take a few minutes to answer the same 4 questions that you see listed on the slide next to me. I know that I cannot wait to learn from their expertise and be inspired by their success. So off we go. First, I'm happy to welcome Sam Houston. In addition to answering many of my questions on many coalition calls, Sam is a senior vehicles analyst for the Clean Transportation Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. In her role, she works to promote public policy and private investments for infrastructure supporting widespread electric vehicle integration. She also provides analysis on modernizing electric grids for better clean energy integration and supports UCS work on fuel economy standards. Take it away, Sam.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Rebecca. I'm really pleased to be here with you all today. A great success from this year that I want to lift up for this webinar is the approval of 52 NEVI plans. Those are plans for the National EV Infrastructure Formula Plan. And we get to 52, counting up all 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico. As I was preparing for this panel, I revisited some old blog posts from earlier in the year, and I was reminded of my concern that some states might not submit their plans on time or at all. Having all of the plans submitted and all approved is really significant. I'm not saying all of the plans are perfect. I acknowledge that the states were working under tight timelines, and there are certainly areas of many state plans that could be improved. However, this first round of planning was really a critical step in getting all states to take the on-ramp for the NEVI program. Having an existing plan that is approved gives states access to the first iteration of formula funds, as well as sets a foundation for planning updates. And as many of you know, states are expected to update their plans every year over the 5 years of the program. And I'll come back to plan updates in just a moment. As I hold up the 52 plans as a success for 2022, you might be wondering about some of the exceptions to the NEVI guidance that were granted as part of those plan approvals, particularly in states that are not as far along in the transition to EVs. And to be honest, I'm not so worried about the exceptions at this point if it means that the joint office who approved the plans met states where they were, especially if the need for exceptions was identified by communities in those states. Now, I'm not saying the plan should be rubber stamped, but overall, I think it's much more important that states got going. And the thing that gives me a lot of hope is thinking about the 5-year trajectory of the program period. I'm really excited to see how the planning and implementation of NEVI progresses through the 5 years of the program and the build out that may continue for a short period thereafter. I mean, just think about how far we've come in the last 5 years. For those of you who, like me, have had their ability to gauge the passage of time altered by the pandemic, I'll note that 5 years ago was December 2017. Think of the federal policy landscape, the Eevee model availability, and other context of 2017 back then. I'd say we've come a long way. Certainly, this year hasn't been without challenges for this work. One thing that's been challenging is tracking 52 venues of activity, or I should say 53, 50 states, DC, Puerto Rico, and all the action that's going on at the federal level as well. The short timelines for issuing guidance and doing the planning has also been a challenge. Plus, there's the tension between getting dollars out the door ASAP to deploy charging and support a rapid transition to decarbonize the transportation sector on the one hand, and then taking the time to do it in a beneficial, community-informed way on the other. I've mentioned the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation a couple of times, and that office is something we certainly didn't have back in 2017. And I think they're really moving the needle. So I'm excited that you'll hear from Dr. Richard Eevee from the Joint Office shortly. I'm highlighting that office because of the guidance, tools, and technical assistance that office is providing, which are so desperately needed. Also, they get it. Based on what I've seen and heard from staff and leadership of the office, they're much more in touch with what needs to happen and who needs a seat at the table in the transition to electric transportation, broadly speaking, than I've ever seen from the federal government. Another reason I'm lifting up the Joint Office in this way is that I hope that they can build on the work they've already done to do even more to provide support, resources, best practice sharing, as well as accountability for how NEVI will meet Justice 40 targets in a meaningful way. We're also, of course, looking forward to seeing the final rule on minimum standards and requirements for NEVI and more on the competitive grants from the bipartisan infrastructure law as well. Looking ahead to 2023, the folks on this call, I would say stay engaged. As I said before, we have 5 years of planning and at least 5 years of building infrastructure ahead of us under NEVI. So as exciting as it was to have the bipartisan infrastructure law passed, setting up NEVI and so many other important programs, the work is just beginning. I know from a recent call with the Midwest Coalition that some states are already beginning to plan their community outreach and engagement for the next NEVI plan update. So we'll need everyone on this call and then some to stay engaged, which may mean different kinds of action on different levels of implementation, community, state, and or federal. And we just heard about a great tool from Rebecca for local governments that will certainly be of use in the coming days and years. And so I look forward to staying engaged with you all. I'll pass it back to you, Rebecca.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate your call to action at the end. I really agree with you that we need all hands on deck to make this happen, and it is certainly such a pleasure to learn from you. Next, I'd like to welcome Matthew Getz. Matthew is an Associate Director of the Mitigation Program at Georgetown Climate Center. He develops legal and policy resources to advance state and federal climate policy for the transportation and power sectors, including supporting the strategic and equitable development of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, and good afternoon, and appreciate the Electrification Coalition organizing this webinar series, and today's webinar in particular. For those who aren't familiar with Georgetown Climate Center, we're a policy institute at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. that was founded really at the direction of state leaders to serve as a resource to state and federal policymakers and work at a nexus of federal and state climate policy. And our engagement in EV charging infrastructure and really a lot of the themes I'll be sharing today relate to our work facilitating discussions amongst the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states on regional planning for EV charging, as well as working with a broader group of states across the country, helping to share the insights and perspectives from these states to help to inform the development of federal EV charging programs. And this work is often in collaboration with NESCOM, so I want to give them a shout out. And this webinar really is such a nice opportunity to zoom out from the sort of day-to-day work grind and think about this really eventful year in EV charging, as well as the exciting year ahead. So I love the theme whenever I heard about this. And frankly, what a year it's been. There's a lot that we could cover, both for federal program development, as well as state planning and deployment and implementation here. But there are two successes that I wanted to talk about today. The first being the wonderful progress that we've seen made at the Joint Office, as well as in states, in ramping up so many programs so quickly. And in particular, wanted to call attention to the progress that we've made over the last 18 months on ensuring that equity is really centered in the implementation of federal funding, going back, I guess, 18 months ago to the release of the interim Justice 40 guidance in July of 2021, until more recently, last month, with the release of the updated climate and economic justice screening tool. So just really exciting developments happening very, very quickly and so critical to a successful program implementation. Of course, there's much more to be done here, including with states having an opportunity to conduct deeper and more meaningful public engagement than was possible last year, perhaps, given some of the tight planning timelines that they were facing. But really, there's been a lot of progress made, and we've got a really helpful federal framework to build from in the upcoming year. Another success that I wanted to share today is the mainstreaming of electric vehicle charging infrastructure within state departments of transportation. And maybe this is an unusual aspect for me to be excited about or to highlight, given so many exciting developments in EV policy at the federal level or otherwise this year. But state departments of transportation have an enormous role to play, I think, as many know, in building, operating, and maintaining our national transportation system. And until now, at least in most jurisdictions or in most cases, EV charging was not a core part of their mission. But with the new bipartisan infrastructure law programs largely being implemented by state departments of transportation, that's really changed. And so while this change perhaps poses some challenges, including coordinating with other agencies and building on what other agencies have been doing for EV charging in many of the states over the last decade, as well as just practical implementation challenges with funding now coming through the U.S. transportation funding process. This enhanced role that state DOTs play, I think, gives us a really unique opportunity to leverage some of their core competencies and really build out a comprehensive charging network across the country. So related to this shift in EV infrastructure investments into the federal state transportation funding process, it means that a great chance to move the needle is for people and organizations to engage in state transportation planning and project prioritization processes. Now, these processes are complex. They vary from state to state and even local jurisdiction to local jurisdiction. And they cover a lot more than EV charging, of course, but it's now highly important to the development of a comprehensive charging station network. And one reason I say this is that we now have a chance to prioritize transportation electrification in broader transportation spending plans. I think many folks know that the dedicated EV charging funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law is a relatively small portion of that bill, right? If people are familiar with the $5 billion NEVI program and the forthcoming $2.5 billion competitive program for charging and fueling infrastructure. But this really pales in comparison to some of the broader and flexible transportation formula funding programs. Like, for example, the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program makes available approximately $70 billion over 5 years. And these funds can be used for a wide range of projects, everything from new road construction to transit projects. But now, under the bipartisan infrastructure law, a new eligibility is for EV charging stations. The states and in some cases local jurisdictions maintain flexibility on how these funds are spent. And as I said, the process varies from state to state with many actors involved, from executive and legislative branches, local and regional governments, But these spending decisions have a major impact, and the transportation project prioritization process has become a key arena, both for moving the needle on EV charging, as well as on reducing transportation emissions more generally. The challenge that I wanted to highlight today also relates to this ramping up of State Department of Transportation engagement and implementation of EV charging infrastructure. And this is a challenge that we've really heard from states and have been working with states on over the past year. And it's somewhat boring, I guess. It's just the nuts and bolts of implementation, whether that's procuring equipment, working out supply chain snags, building up the workforce to deploy the stations, as well as just ramping up internal capacity for planning and program administration, as well as for conducting the public engagement that's needed, particularly with overburdened and underserved communities. So I think a lot of support is needed to help to build up this whole new capacity within state agencies. Now, looking ahead to the next year, and I'm really building on what Sam said here, but I think it's super important to be focused on the sort of near-term, day-to-day implementation and sort of getting some charging infrastructure in the ground. We really need to keep an eye on the long-term processes that have a major impact here to set us up for success, not just next year in 2023, but over the next decade. And in particular, there are two critical planning processes that are underway in every state that have long-term planning horizons. The first, as I mentioned, is the transportation planning and project prioritization decision-making process. And a second I wanted to highlight is the utility infrastructure planning and investment process. So for the utility process, there's really an opportunity that we have right now for more comprehensive statewide or utility service territory-wide planning efforts, rather than electric utilities just making an assessment or the needed grid upgrades for individual sites or individual customers who are installing a fast charging station. It's really important that we make sure that state NEVI plans are closely related to utility transportation electrification plans and broader statewide plans, as well as for states to look at opportunities to encourage this proactive, more comprehensive planning. Because some of the investments that are going to be needed to the distribution grid or even the bulk power system, like transmission upgrades that might be needed to support electric truck charging, these could have a 5 or a 10-year window between the start of the planning or investment process and bringing that asset online. So if we're going to have the charging stations that we need to support deep deployment of charging infrastructure, not just for electric cars, but also for trucks down the road in 5 or 10 years, a lot of those investment plans and decisions need to be made right now, or at least get started right now. And so I'll leave folks with that thought. I think to be successful, it's really important that we implement this funding and get the infrastructure in the ground. But we also need to plan strategically and, so to speak, dig once on laying the infrastructure for these charging stations. So we got to keep an eye on the long-term planning horizons, start doing some of these assessments and electric utility upgrades now, not just those that are needed for the first year or two of NEVI, but into the future. Because paradoxically, even though these are long-term planning processes, we need to act with urgency on them today to make sure that we're set up for success for the next year and beyond. I'll turn it back to you, Rebecca. Thanks.
Thanks, Matthew. We really appreciate your time today. And I definitely agree with you that we need to keep an eye on these long-term processes. And I know I am excited to help shape those with all of you. Next, I would like to welcome Blair St. Ledger Olson. Blair is a behavioral ecologist turned climate policy advocate, currently serving as the legislative director at Climate Cabinet. After influential experiences both in the nonprofit and private sectors, she leverages behavioral science techniques to build climate policy capacity and expertise in state legislatures and governments across the country, and helps local leaders run, win, and legislate on the climate crisis. And before she starts, I would like to offer special congratulations to Blair on a massively successful midterms. We are really proud of you and really grateful for your work.
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. Like Rebecca said, my name is Blair St. Ledger Olson, and I'm the Legislative Director for Climate Cabinet. It's really hard to go after Sam and Matthew and Richard, who's coming up. I mean, they are just such fantastic advocates and have such a deep knowledge base in this space. So I'm going to really attempt to dip into my focus on down ballot, which is local, state, city council members, as I try to answer these questions, because that's really one of my favorite things about what's happened from a charging success perspective for 2022 is we have seen this shift from we're looking at the federal government to really solve this charging problem, so to speak, or to be the only lever. And while absolutely the IIJA and the IRA are huge levers for charging, the thing I'm most excited about seeing from those pieces of legislation passing is how local governments in particular and state governments within the NEVI plans are all of a sudden realizing that this is something that they have a role to play in, whether or not it's the zoning and siting of EV charging infrastructure in their communities, it's the tie-in between energy makeup and our grid stability. There's really been a shift in that play. And I think a part of the reason we're having that shift is really because of the dialogue we're having here today, the work that the advocacy community has been doing, the work that the manufacturers and the OEMs have been doing in order to amplify and create more noise around these issues. And we're no longer just thinking about charging infrastructure in transportation corridors. A lot of the money, yes, in the IIJA goes to, for those NEVI plants, goes to highway corridors, but we're already starting to see additional sources and opportunities, like Matt was saying, that can be really used outside of that framework. And we're starting to think about how we incorporate EV charging into our daily lives. And as a behavioral scientist, first and foremost for me, that's really exciting to see that development, is this is no longer a sort of obscure topic that we're discussing. We're starting to see this every single day in our conversations. And I actually, just yesterday, learned multiple legislators who I had no idea were EV owners are already driving electric. Their spouses are driving electric. They plan on having their kids' first car be electric. And I just, it makes my life so much easier as I try to move the needle from a state and local policy perspective when the people I'm working with already have that, that button seat kind of experience with an EV. So the barriers are so much less there. And that's a big part of what I think is moving the needle. We're lowering those barriers in a couple different ways. We see both from the ads, the communications perspective, where we see these really big companies moving and leaning in the same direction. We had the Audi e-tron be featured in Marvel movies recently in the last couple years. So it's getting into our culture. I can't help but talk about this, guys. I'm a behavior scientist. I see those little nudges everywhere in my life. But we're also increasing opportunities for people to engage with this technology as we electrify fleets. People are 2 to 3 times more likely to go electric if they have actually interacted with an electric vehicle. So as we start to electrify state and local fleets, and we install infrastructure around those electrified fleets to support those government decisions who are trying to lead on this issue themselves, we are therefore still increasing the number of people who are going to have the opportunity to test drive an electric vehicle, are going to have the opportunity to go electric. And in that is a mutually reinforcing feedback cycle that increases the infrastructure right along with it. So that's been really, really fantastic to see that combo of moving the needle, because it's not just one or the other. It really, all of these things have to work together, not always seamlessly. I won't say we're always that good, but really rowing in the same direction. The one thing I will say has been my greatest challenge, and it's because I work in a political space, has been, as we see electric vehicles, and it shouldn't be this way, but become more and more partisan. And I really appreciate the work that Electrification Coalition does, that SAFE does, to try to continue to break down those barriers and say, no, this is really an opportunity where both parties can align. This is better for charging our electric vehicles, is better for reinvesting money in the local economy. It's better for energy security. It's just so much better for so many reasons. And so, we need to keep having these conversations. We need to keep reaching across the aisle, because clean energy writ large, but in particular, transportation electrification, should not be something that isn't encouraged and exciting to people on both sides of the aisle. And hopefully, as we also figure out how to navigate this whole gas tax shift, that will become more and more easier and easier every day. I think that's something that's going to definitely be a tough one for all of us to put our heads together on, because there's so many different ways to do this and talk about it. And you're getting way above my area of expertise when you start talking about tax structure, for what it's worth. So I might, if anyone asks a question about that, I'm definitely punting to one of the other people on this call. They know better than me. But wrapping up my component, my speech of this, we're asked to say, like, what was the most important action step that folks can take to make sure that this electrification movement is effective and equitable, in particular for 2023. And honestly, keep using your voice. I work in politics and I work in policy, so that's always going to be what I fall back on. My work is centered around encouraging communities who often don't have a seat at the table to create a space for them in a landscape like policy and politics that's often overwhelming and doesn't create space organically. You have to claw your way. And so really keep showing up to events like this, leverage these advocates that we've got. If there's someone who you can't reach and you need help banging on their door, let us know. We want to help connect you to the people who can affect change. And if they aren't hearing from us, if they aren't seeing us propose policy solutions that do make sure we are not just focusing on transportation corridors, for instance, they're not going to do it on their own. And we need to make sure that this transition supports electric vehicles, because that's what we're here to talk about in rural and low-income communities. We also need to make sure this transition supports micromobility, so electric bikes and scooters. Don't put me on an electric skateboard. I will fall. Things will get broken. But all of these other different forms of electric transportation and buses, and creating access to those buses that really doesn't exist right now. When we talk about trying to electrify transit, it can't just be, well, we're going to expand the transit system and do nothing to fix it, or we're going to electrify the transit system and do nothing to fix it. We have to also make sure that these electric buses go where people need them, that there's shelter when they're waiting for these buses, that they are designed with routes and times in mind to help the people who most need access. And that's something that we have to make sure as we kind of tackle that lowest hanging fruit as we try to speed up this adoption, which I absolutely agree is where the focus makes the most sense as we kick things off. But we need to make sure that everything we do is also reinforcing that need to make sure we are never, ever forgetting who at the table most needs this. Because when we think about transportation writ large and who the transportation system benefits the most and who it impacts the most, we need to make sure we're also addressing that serious inequity within the transportation system as we try to make a better, more modernized, electrified future. So with that, Rebecca, I'm going to hand things back over to you.
Awesome, Blair. I'm feeling so motivated. Thank you so much. And thank you especially for encouraging us to use our voices and for making space for us to do that. And congratulations again on an amazing year. Finally, I would like to welcome Richard Ezeki. Richard is a program communication specialist at the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. At the Joint Office, Richard supports stakeholder engagement and outreach with a focus on equity, environmental justice, and workforce development around the electrification of transportation. Richard, we've loved getting to meet you and getting to work with you, and we are so glad that you're here with us today. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. So first off, again, thank you for the opportunity to allow me to speak and share my thoughts. It's been great to be on this panel with my fellow colleagues, Sam, Blair, and Matt. I mean, just the comments that they've shared so far aligns a lot with what I feel and what I plan to share as well. I mean, we're just seeing such an amazing transformation in transportation space. And for me to be in the Joint Office and be in kind of the inside of all this is happening is quite amazing. So a little bit about me. I started the Joint Office in September. So I'm a little close to 3 months at the office. And it's I've been mostly working in the nonprofit space over the last 7 or 8 years in the transportation space. So it's been interesting to kind of see this transition into the federal government and seeing what how it operates and how we're moving this needle forward. So for those who don't know about the Joint Office, again, we were established in 2021 under the bipartisan infrastructure law. And our focus over the next 5 years is to really promote the electrification of transportation. Our mission is to encourage everyone to ride and drive electric. And so we are trying to do that in many different ways. Our main areas of focus, as has been mentioned from our previous panelists, are overseeing the $5 billion in the NEVI funds We're also going to be overseeing the 2.5 billion in the community and corridor charging grants. Half of that going to corridors, which are alternative fuel corridors. That's designated by the Federal Highway Administration, and 1.25 billion going to communities via competitive grants. And so we're going to be helping manage those over the next few months. We're also in charge of the low and no emission grant program, and also the Clean School Bus Transit Program, which of course provides funds to greenify school bus fleets. So there's a lot going on within the Joint Office and just in general with the federal government regarding electrification. So I would say the biggest success that we've seen is, as my colleague Sam mentioned, caveat, I actually used to work at UCS along with Sam. We were at UCS at the same time. So it's been great to see her progress and her engagement, and, you know, her using her amazing knowledge to really push this forward, electrification forward. So I just want to, you know, shout her out. You know, speaker's prerogative. But in terms of success, there's so much that, you know, the Joint Office has done just in 2022. You know, you're seeing just how fast this transition is occurring, and how fast you know, things are getting on the ground. As is mentioned earlier, we approved all the state's plans in September 2022. We established a MOU, a memorandum of understanding with the NASIO, which is the National Association of State Energy Officials, and also ASTRO, which is the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. And we're working with states to help to help deploy their plans. We're the face of the question that they're asking about how to install their chargers in their states, how to incorporate equity, how to incorporate workforce development opportunities. There's so much that's happening over the last 7 months. And I came in September. So I came with all this stuff come right in my face, and it's like, wow, it's just really amazing to see this movement happen. And so it's just really great to see this growth, and, you know, we could continue to do that, and we could continue to see this growth happening. In terms of moving the needle, it's the community, it's organizations like EC, like UCS. You are the ones that are helping us within the federal government to really push these issues forward. I could say in my 2 months, I've probably met or spoke at, 10 to 15 conferences, had almost so many meetings with companies, nonprofits, community groups, who are all interested in understanding how to utilize this money to really push our goal forward of installing 500,000 chargers. And so it's great to see that you all, no matter where you are, no matter what organization you're involved in, are pushing us forward to make sure that we meet our goals. And I encourage you all, in your own unique way, in your own space, to continue doing that. We at the Joint Office are keen listeners. You know, we are wanting to understand how we can best push this goal forward with the monies that we're overseeing in partnership with the Federal Highway Administrations. I mean, and we have so many questions that we're trying to figure out ourselves. You know, I can give a little bit some examples about that. I mean, when internally we're really focusing on equity, and we are embedding equity in all our programming and all our initiatives. Well, we've heard from many different community groups to make sure that's a priority, and how to operationalize Justice 40 is a constant topic of discussion within the Joint Office. And we are, looking to you all to see, learn about metrics and how to measure equity, how to operationalize it, how to ensure that this funding and this transition into electrification impacts people, especially in underserved and overburdened communities. They're definitely making that a top priority. We're also focusing on workforce development. That's a very key point. How do we create new job opportunities for people in these communities and across the country to ensure that the economic growth from electrification really moves this country forward? And so we're talking quite a bit about that as well. Again, what type of programs, what type of certifications. We're all putting this down on paper. I'm telling you right now, just before this talk, I was talking with my colleagues about, the workforce development strategies. So we are in real time, really trying to push, so many initiatives forward. And again, with your all's assistance and guidance, we can make that happen. And so in terms of our challenges, I think it's just trying to really keep pace with everything. As mentioned by previous colleagues, everything is happening so fast, right? And trying to keep abreast of it all is it can be daunting. But so we're trying to figure out, how do we operationalize equity and purchase 40? How do we look at workforce development? What are our strategies to best to install these charges? How do the states, what are their concerns? We're hearing from states already about, how to incorporate public engagement and community engagement. Companies and organizations who are interested in learning how they can get engaged in the formula funds and the competitive grants as well. And so there's a lot of questions, a lot of questions, a lot of unanswered questions. And we are going to be hopefully using 2022 and 2023 to really get into those topics and really help push the needle forward and get a plan moving forward, so that people can, so organizations can get engaged. So upcoming in 2023, again, there's a lot that's happening. We're going to be likely putting out our FOA for the competitive grants real soon. I can't give an exact date on that. I can tell you that we're working on that language right now. I've seen some of the drafts, and I'll just leave it at that. But we are really moving forward on that. And of course, the states are already starting to put out their RFPs or procurement processes for the formula funds within the NEVI. So they are, again, reaching out to us, I guess, for guidance on a lot of different topics that are of interest to them. And so we're going to be helping on that front as well. And then as we move forward with as the states get their funds, and then we start to see the no emission and the clean school bus program start to take off as well. I'm looking forward to seeing how those dollars are going to be allocated and be utilized. And so I'll conclude that we are very excited to join office. We appreciate the activity and the engagement from the community and interested parties in seeing electrification of transportation happen. And we are all in this together. And we look forward to continue to get your support and questions and guidance. And we just really get appreciative of all your advice, and look forward to continue to seeing that into 2023.
Richard, thank you so much. Maybe it's niche, but I want to go run a marathon and then get to work. I'm feeling super motivated and really empowered. And it's especially empowering to hear about all of your successes, and it's really motivating to me to learn about what we can all do together in 2023. We have a huge job to do, and we're lucky to have the four of you to lead us in all of that. We are now going to turn to the Q&A section of our webinar. We have received a number of questions so far, and we encourage all of you to keep putting your questions in the Q&A box. We'll get to as many as we can before the end of our time together today. So first and foremost, I would like to know which federal funds communities should be sure to take advantage of in the coming year.
I can try to answer that. So in the coming year, as I mentioned, the community and corridor charging grants, that $2.5 billion that has been mentioned many different times. So as I mentioned, there's about one half of that is going to go to alternative fuel corridors. You can find what those corridors are in the Federal Highway Administration. They post on the website. But then the other $1.25 billion is going to be discretionary funds for communities to engage in installing charging stations. But in addition, there are a number of different uses that those funds can be used for. We definitely are talking about education of communities, because a lot of people may not understand the importance of electrification. Why is a charging station being installed in the neighborhood? Why is it, or if I do want charging stations and I don't have access to my home, how can I do that? So those funds are going to be available for those types of programs and engagement as well. So definitely look out for that. And then on the formula funds, I do want to know there's a 10% set aside as determined by the DOT, the Secretary of the Department of Transportation, for filling in the gaps. So, as mentioned, the $5 billion is mostly for highway corridor charging, but we also understand, the Joint Office, that there is a need to fill in those gaps within those areas, because not everybody lives near a highway. So really encourage people to just keep an eye out for when the opportunity for the community grants comes out. And then also, even in the IRA, there was a lot of tax credits that were established, and definitely with a focus on trying to get people who typically aren't EV owners into as EV owners, become EV owners as well, through both the new and used tax credits, for example. So there's a lot of opportunities that are coming down the pipeline from the federal government, and we, the Joint Office, and my fellow colleagues at the DOE, DOT, and other agencies that are engaged in electrification will keep everybody informed when they come down the pipeline.
Been to +1 to what Richard said. As just to quote him, there's a lot out there, which is really exciting. Certainly the community grants that he mentioned are really important, to Blair's point that we can't just focus on corridors. And so it's really great to have that kind of support at the federal level. Also the IRA. There are state and utility programs going on as well. So I guess really the bottom line for me is communities should have the opportunity to apply for whatever grants will fit their needs. And as Richard said, this is about riding and driving electric. It's not all about individual car ownership. And so there are a whole suite of programs that cover everything from transit to community chargers for folks who don't have access to home charging but need to have a vehicle. So I think really it's incumbent upon all of us, and thanks to having some great resources in the Joint Office and from organizations represented here, to have tools to help guide communities in making those decisions.
If I might add one piece. Oh, I'm sorry, Blair, go ahead.
No, I was going to let you go. We're
Okay.
the most polite panel here, I swear.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, if I might add one piece, and really excited about the community charging program that we'll be rolling out and what that will mean, and this sort of whole new opportunity to engage with the federal funding for charging infrastructure. But related to the corridor charging, for communities that maybe are not along a designated alternative fuel corridor right now, I think it is really important that they have an opportunity to talk with their state Department of Transportation, whether that's directly or through a local government or a council of governments, to say, hey, in the next round of corridor designations, like think of this road or that road that you might be able to designate, and that would then make that roadway eligible for charging under future years of the NEVI program. So just one other thing I wanted to point out.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. I'm going to turn this question a little bit on its head. It is absolutely important for us and for communities and states to be thinking about what federal funds they should be taking advantage of. But I also want to uplift that states and communities need to also meet this moment with their own dedicated funding. This is not singly the federal government's role. Every level of government, whether or not you're a county commissioner, you're a city council member, you are a public utility commission, you are a board for either a sewer board or air pollution, or you happen to run a port, by the way, because we have a lot of electrification to do at that level. We all have to work together to maximize these funds as best as we can. And the federal government's doing a great job right now to lead that moment, but everybody else has to step up as well. So I hope we start seeing more states say, we're not just going to exclusively rely on these funds, we're also going to do what we can to match them and work alongside our federal partners.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I feel really motivated by the message that all of you have reflected, that this is going to take all of us. And I know that even through the end, Richard, like you said, through the end of 2022 and as we hit 2023 running, we're excited to all be together doing it. Next question is, what keeps you up at night for federal infrastructure programming?
Work nightmares starting for anyone? I mean, I get them constantly, but as we get closer and closer to legislative session, I'm starting to dream that I am in the building having those work nightmares. So who gets the worst ones?
I don't get the worst ones, but they're pretty panicky at times. You know, and except being inside the beast that is the federal government, and in the middle of all this, as I mentioned in my earlier comments, we have so many things coming down the pipeline. You know, we're having a strategy. We're trying to develop a strategy for equity. We're trying to develop a strategy for workforce development. We got the the forward that's coming up for the community and core charging grants. We got states who are they're finally starting to, implement their plans, and they want technical assistance from the joint office. Of course, it's the communications aspect that I work in. We're getting so many requests from people to talk to us one-on-one and then provide their advice and thoughts. So it's interesting. There's a lot of I'm finding there's a lot of angles coming into to my colleagues at the joint office, and sometimes it's a lot, and we have sometimes those late nights at work where I have to fill in that final document so I can send it off to my comms lead, those little day-to-day things. But I step back, and even if I might get maybe 3 or 4 hours of sleep one night, I get up the next morning thinking that we're making progress to a really amazing transformation we're all a part of. So yeah, there may be some sleepless nights, but the overall goal is what we're striving to do, and I'm so happy to be a part of that movement along with you all on this call. So.
Yeah,
Sam, you want to go?
Yeah, I was going to say that resonates with me a little bit. I'm not on the inside of government, but certainly, the furious working and things, a lot going on. The thing that really comes to mind for me as one of the more acute concerns is that tension I mentioned between moving quickly, but also moving slowly to make investments in the right way. So as Matthew mentioned, dig once, right? Build up the site, the grid need, do the planning, get that all done, and make sure it's done right. And then also the sort of need to move slowly with working with historically underserved, communities, low-income communities of color, to make sure that this is rolling out in an equitable way. That requires time against the urgency of reducing climate emissions and local air pollution emissions that are harming people's health. So, there's a tension in that that keeps me up at night, to the point of the question. But again, sort of to Richard's point of hope, we have a lot of great colleagues working on this, some of them sitting right here. And so, you keep the work moving, and you keep putting one foot in front of the other and doing the best we can.
I'll try not to be negative after those 2 positive messages. But if you know me well, I'm a very much a worst case scenario kind of person. I plan for about 18 different worst case scenarios, but then I am pleasantly surprised when I don't need 1 through 17. And because I work state and local policy, that's honestly one of my biggest concerns, is how state and local policy has to be on it in order to ensure that all of these programs get implemented effectively. There are definitely ways in which governments who are less friendly to the clean energy transition could very much negatively impact how these funds are disseminated. And we have examples, for instance, of that in Minnesota, where they tried to pass a bill blocking the state from being able to submit a NEVI plan. Now, thankfully, that piece of legislation failed, and yay, 2022, Minnesota is a different land now politically. But there's those types of attacks that we really need to be keeping our eye out for, as people who may not want to see transportation electrification be accelerated try to block it and really keep us tied to the fossil fuel infrastructure.
If I can add on that, that's a great point, Blair. I mean, I try to, as someone in the inside, I try to read articles, both the positive and the negatives, and where she mentioned that those the threats at the state level are very real, and even if you look into the federal and court system as well, where some states are submitting brief to stop everything. I mean, they can't stop the implementation of BIL and IRA, but they can slow it down, or they can use the courts to mitigate and really derail things. So these are real threats. These are real concerns, and we need to be aware of those and think about as you do in any politics, how do you navigate around those, or if something not great comes down the pipeline, how do you push back and try to overcome the obstacles? These are real issues, So I really appreciate you sharing that perspective, Blair. It's real.
If I might offer another aspect of that, less on the side of sort of direct challenges or opposition, and more just on the need across so many levels of government and across so many states and local jurisdictions, that we need to keep our sort of collective foot on the accelerator with things like utility rate design and active investment planning processes, right? To make sure that not only that we implement the federal funding for charging infrastructure effectively, but also that we aren't inadvertently increasing ratepayer bills, right? If it's done correctly, it can have massive benefits and reduce costs for everybody across the system for electricity and reduce transportation burden. But we need to proactively plan and take actions to do that across all the states. And so I know there's been a ton of effort over the past years and even a decade by the electric vehicle policy community engaging in state utility regulatory processes, but with so much attention right now at the federal level and on the implementation of these programs, we got to keep our eye on that as well.
Hopefully, we will lessen our collective sleepless nights with all of your advice and all of your feedback. So keeping in the theme with a year in review and looking forward, I'm wondering what all of your New Year Eevee charging resolutions are.
Like personally or professional for those of us who are Eevee owners ourselves?
Both.
To take the campaign materials out of my electric vehicle. They're still there. The election was in November. I've still got like 18 different candidates flyers in it.
Amazing.
Good.
Yeah, for me, I would say personally, on the personal side, it's getting on a list for an Eevee. I think I'll hopefully still be able to commute a lot by bike, but we'd like to transition our one car in the household to electric. And we're hopeful that we may be able to thread the needle on getting access to the tax credit, depending on how some of the vehicle eligibility shakes out in the guidance from IRS. In work, I would say one of my resolutions is to try to keep pushing vehicle grid integration, particularly for power export, from being emerging as it has for like 15 years into something that's not emerging anymore. So that's something I'm really excited about continuing to stay engaged on in the coming year. And I've now said it with a bunch of witnesses that it's my resolution to keep pushing for that.
We'll hold you to it.
Please do.
I'll jump in. I think I might be trying to get on some of those same lists potentially in the market for a new for a car this year, and electric vehicle would be amazing. So that's definitely something I'm shopping for. And as far as the work or policy side, I think we're hoping to spend a bit more time this year on focusing on the development of resources and support materials that would enable increased community engagement in state planning processes. And we've been doing a lot of focus on supporting state and federal policy, but as we have these a little bit longer lead times, for example, for the development of the second year of NEVI plans, I think there's a chance to devote a greater attention to finding out ways to enable more meaningful public participation and doing that in a really thoughtful way with community partners.
Yeah, and to conclude, in terms of professional side, I'll just echo what Matthew said. Really work, helping states to build out the community engagement strategies, and that's something we're talking about quite a bit in joint office. So that's on the professional side, and then personally, even kind of related to that, I have a lot of people a lot of my friends and people that I work with in these historical communities who are very skeptical of electric vehicles. They see it as, a charger means to gentrification. I'm going to be pushed out of my neighborhood and all that. And so I'm personally making it a priority to really go into these neighborhoods, go into these communities, people that I know, people that I work with, or who I've done community service with, and just educate and learn and teach. And understand, because it can't just be one way. It has to be, okay, we're hearing these, what are they saying? And how can we ensure that the equitable and accessible deployment of EV charging happens without, engendering some of the unfortunate, instances of displacement and that have happened for other transportation improvements. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Those are great resolutions, and I can't wait to check in a couple months and see how all of them are progressing. The last question that I'm going to ask all of you today is, who else do we need to bring in to the charging conversation in 2023?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's going to be hard for all of us to come up with different people. But I think my answer would really, and we're starting to see this more and more, but it's labor, in particular, unions for electricians. So I work with IBEW a lot, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And these are the folks who are going to be maintaining these charging systems. They are the folks who are going to be installing them. They are the folks who are going to help you install your charger in your house. And we need to make sure, one, that we are supporting good paying jobs within that sector, because we do have a national shortage of electricians right now, because we have historically as a country devalued that sort of work, the trades work. But I really think that they have an important perspective to provide in how we're doing building design, so that these types of chargers are easily integrated into new construction, on how we integrate electrification into renovations. They really see everything in terms of what our electrical system, our wiring system, our grid can handle literally within their hands. I mean, I think they get electrocuted minorly a lot. So they literally have the evidence on their hands of what this takes. And so I want to make sure we provide space and room for their perspectives and voices as we do this, and to make sure that they're being supported in this transition.
That's a great answer. I love that, Blair. Thanks so much for raising that point. I might venture and add metropolitan planning organizations and other regional planning associations. They're, of course, already engaged in this space, but might need a sort of a bigger seat at the table in 2023. And I'm particularly thinking of the role that they might play in the upcoming competitive funding application processes, and they might be able to organize sort of multi-jurisdictional applications between smaller towns or even within a city to have a more kind of a coordinated plan for where these charging stations are going to go, and maybe make some of the joint office staff's life a little bit easier in sorting through all those applications once those start to come in. So that's one idea, and they'll have many other roles to play as well, but looking forward to working with them.
I won't add anything to that. I mean, regional organizations and the labor, labor community, two very important entities that we need to engage, and we're already starting to do that.
Yeah, I certainly agree that everyone is affected by transportation, because we all need to get around, and there are many stakeholders on the economic side too, to the point about labor, and certainly mobility and NPOs go hand in hand. I guess I would raise two things. I know this has been a priority for a lot of us, and the Joint Office is pushing for more engagement of communities who have historically been underserved. And so continuing to bring those voices in will be important, sort of to the points about bringing in every level of government and, community organizing. So that will continue to be important. And then the other element I've been thinking more and more about on the sort of wonky side is our regional transmission grid operators. I think Matthew alluded to these earlier, but we need them to be planning more and better in a very forward-looking way for a highly electrified future. Certainly that includes transportation electrification. That'll be a big piece, but it's beyond that. And so I've been delving into regional transmission land a little bit lately, and some regional operators, they have a start, but we certainly need them to be thinking through much more aggressive scenarios so that we can fit this whole puzzle together, from generation to transmission to distribution to the site, whether that's a bus depot or a home or an apartment building or other. So I would offer those two.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. That brings us to the end of our time together today and to the end of our 2022 webinar series. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to all of you for joining us. We have a few more tricks up our sleeves before the end of the year at the EC, so please watch your inbox and watch our website for some new exciting resources. We cannot wait to see you back on Zoom in 2023 and maybe even in person. Thank you again and happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay safe.